Lost in Random
It
is
was a mad quest for an insane, upside-down mayor. But it was all Even had to go on.
Anyway, as I was saying, Lost in Random
Even knew she was now awake and knew this was the same house she'd lived in her entire life. But something seemed off.
Oh my god, does this guy ever shut up? Disclaimer upfront for the sake of, or at the expense of, my credibility, I couldn't make it through this game. Recently I've started to realize that I don't have the most patience when it comes to video game stories. This isn't always the case, but I feel like oftentimes the story is not as well developed because there's a whole giant other portion to the medium that is either more fun than the story, or at the very least interrupting it so often that it's hard to write something that remains cohesive throughout the whole session. Lost in Random tries to remedy this flaw by having the narrator never stop talking. This isn't the biggest problem in the world. I mean, the Stanley Parable had a very vocal narrator, and that game was good. Of course, that was the entire point of the game. I think maybe the biggest problem I had with this game is that it seemed very promising, and nothing was too terrible on its own, but all of the flaws compiled to the point that I was too annoyed to really do any of it. The gameplay has this neat concept where you have a deck of cards and a die, which you build up energy in to roll and then spend the points it gains on said cards. You can build the deck a few different ways, but the cards then allow you to gain weapons, cast spells, or otherwise affect the battle in cool little ways. This already came with a small problem. Until you roll the die, all you have is a slingshot that does no damage, which you use to slowly build up energy in order to roll the die, which makes the beginning of every fight slow and monotonous as you try to avoid enemies while chipping away at their glowy weak spots in order to even start fighting. Then, to make matters worse, there's a cool card system where you can alter your deck to have different strategies in the fights. Except you have to have 15 cards in your deck, and the game starts you with only 8, so it takes a while to build up to the point where you have any choice at all, since if you have less than 15, the game automatically puts every card you own in the deck. So the pacing of the fights was slow, but so was the pacing of the larger deck building portion of it, which means all that's left is the story. If things were fun or interesting, I could be held over in a whimsical world while I waited for things to pick up with the actual gameplay. Lost in Random takes place in, well, random. A world where long ago people used dice to fight, and now only the queen has a magic die, and anyone who turns 12 has to roll the magic die to figure out how rich they're allowed to be. The game starts on your sister's birthday, and before you even get the chance to groan about the fact that you are named Even and Odd, she rolls a 6 and is abducted to live with the queen forever in Fancy Pants Land. Since you live in one land, you must then travel through every other number on a 6-sided die to eventually reach and save her. There's a chance at this point that you're still interested in the story. I was at first. That's what got me to try out the game in the first place. But that same flaw keeps popping up. No matter where you look, it feels like the person creating everything had an understanding of what a game should look like, but no real idea on how to flesh it out. So everything, and I do mean everything, just falls a little bit flat. For example, the aforementioned narrator. He's constantly talking to tell you about the events of the story, which is annoying enough on its own, but also breaks the first rule of visual media, show don't tell. The narrator is constantly explaining things that are super obvious and would generally be more interesting if left unsaid. As a matter of fact, I think this game would be 100% more playable if someone just modded out the narrator entirely. Of course, it doesn't solve every problem. The writing consistently falls into the pitfalls that come when you don't trust your audience to understand things. In the first section of the game, you and your sister are running from robots and see the nanny, one of the main villains of the game. But the audience hasn't met her yet, so your character has to ask who she is, and your sister has to explain, which makes no sense considering how prominent this character is in the game's world. If she had just said, "Watch out, we don't want to run into the nanny," then the player could figure things out from there. It makes no sense for a character in this world to not know the danger she is literally currently trying to avoid, considering this opening sequence is the main character trying to hide her sister from the birthday dice rolling. Most of the time, the characters themselves aren't being the most annoying people ever though, or at least the main ones aren't. Very quickly on your journey, you end up in Two Town, which has the terrible gimmick of literally every single character having two personalities. Most conversations you have revolve around the same concept that the two personalities are different and don't get along because of it. It gets old ridiculously quickly. Maybe it's because I consider myself a little bit of a writer, but it's just so hard to get past this for me. The game would probably be good otherwise, but it almost feels like the developers wanted every bit of dead space to be filled with someone yapping. Maybe the most concise example of how the terrible writing affects the game is with the main companion. As I barely mentioned earlier, you have a magical die that you roll to do stuff in the game. Well, luckily for us, it's sentient and has multiple conversations with Even. Unluckily for us, it speaks in random gibberish. Even just the obvious trope of having the main character repeat what the gibberish person is saying would be better than what happened, but it's mostly just millennial, "well, that just happened" dialogue the whole time. There isn't a single meaningful word said between the two, and even though it's implied that Even can fully fully understand Dicey, the player can't, and so any world building that could have possibly happened doesn't, for literally no reason. It sucks to be so harsh on a game I probably didn't even get through 20% of, but it was just impossible for me to keep pushing myself through, especially when I knew I would have to go back and record some of the stuff for the video. Even when the writing wasn't pushing itself down my throat, the rest of the game didn't get exciting enough to push me forward either. The title of the game may be the most accurate thing about it. It doesn't feel like anything was done for any reason. Everything feels like the first thought the creator had with no refinement whatsoever. Doors that need to be opened by rolling the correct number, which create arbitrary barriers due to the fact that Dicey is incomplete when you find him, makes sense in terms of gameplay. But if you try to extrude any of that into the world you're currently inhabiting, not a single piece of it makes sense, especially considering that you are the only dice wielder in the game, so it's not like civilization runs on these dice. Why is there a door that needs one? Okay, so there was a puzzle, if you can even call it that. It was pretty simple. You had to slingshot and there were switches you could hit with it. So you hit the switch to move the platform so that you can cross it. Then you hit the same switch again to move it back to its original position, which is where you need it now. So then you're looking for another platform or another switch since you need to continue moving forward. But no, you hit the same switch a third time. Nothing visually indicated that this would be the case, and it would have been just as easy to have a second moving platform. This isn't design, it's just stuff. I don't have the language required to analyze this, but this isn't a game, right? It's just a loose collection of things that look like a game, but none of it is cohesive, whether you're looking at it as a world within which a story takes place or a video game about magical RNG-based combat. Most people probably won't be as enraged as I was by every little piece of this game. I don't think any one bit of it is all that bad by any means, but when you try to take it all together, not only are you left with a constant stream of minor irritations, but you start to realize that they don't even fit together as one full product. This game somehow manages to feel like less than the sum of all of its parts. Each piece is getting in the way of each other to the point where even if you enjoy something about it, chances are you're going to have to fight through a whole lot of stuff you don't just to get there. Unless you like really annoying overbearing characters, then you're almost always having a good time.